The afternoon light came through the tall windows of Morgan's Leversode's restoration studio in Philadelphia. It cast long shadows across her workbench. She adjusted her magnifying lamp and looked closely at the photograph that had arrived that morning. It was a family portrait from 1899, mounted in a cracked leather frame. The image was hard to see because of water damage, age spots, and a deep crease that ran across the lower part. The client's email was short. Found this in my grandmother's attic. Family portrait. Would love to see it restored before I pass it down to my daughter. Morgan had been restoring old photographs for 12 years. She had seen many portraits from the turn of the century. This one seemed simple at first. 4 figures posed in the stiff, formal way common in that time. A man and woman stood in the back with serious faces. 2 younger people, probably their grown children, stood on either side. She carefully took the photograph out of its frame. She noticed the brittle edges and the spots that had damaged parts of the picture. The studio mark on the back was partly readable. Richardson's Photography, Philadelphia, PA, 1899. She set up her scanner and started the careful process of digitizing it. She used the highest resolution possible, knowing every pixel might hold hidden details. After the scan finished, she moved the file to her main monitor and opened it in her restoration software. The first step was always the same. Check the damage, mark the areas that needed work, and make a plan. She zoomed in slowly, studying each part of the photograph. The faces were worn, but could be fixed. The background, a painted studio backdrop of a Victorian parlor, was faded but okay. Then her eye noticed something in the damaged area at the bottom, where the crease had ruined most of the detail. She leaned closer to the screen. There was a shape there that she had first thought was just shadow or damage, but as she adjusted the contrast a little, the shape seemed to have real form. Morgan's heart beat faster. In all her years of restoration, she had learned to trust these moments when something felt unusual. She saved her work and stood up to stretch. Tomorrow, she would start rebuilding that damaged section pixel by pixel. She had no idea she was about to discover a secret hidden for 125 years. Morgan reached her then. The afternoon light came through the tall windows of Morgan's morgue, restoration studio in Philadelphia. It cast long shadows across her workbench. She adjusted her magnifying lamp and looked closely at the photograph that had arrived that morning. It was a family portrait from 1899, mounted in a cracked leather frame. The image was hard to see because of water damage, age spots, and a deep crease that ran across the lower part. The client's email was short. Found this in my grandmother's attic. Family portrait. Would love to see it restored before I pass it down to my daughter. Morgan had been restoring old photographs for 12 years. She had seen many portraits from the turn of the century. This one seemed simple at first. 4 figures posed in the stiff, formal way common in that time. A man and woman stood in the back with serious faces. 2 younger people, probably their grown children, stood on either side. She carefully took the photograph out of its frame. She noticed the brittle edges and the spots that had damaged parts of the picture. The studio mark on the back was partly readable. Richardson's Photography, Philadelphia, PA, 1899. She set up her scanner and started the careful process of digitizing it. She used the highest resolution possible, knowing every pixel might hold hidden details. After the scan finished, she moved the file to her main monitor and opened it in her restoration software. The first step was always the same. Check the damage, mark the areas that needed work, and make a plan. She zoomed in slowly, studying each part of the photograph. The faces were worn but could be fixed. The background, a painted studio backdrop of a Victorian parlor, was faded but okay. Then her eye noticed something in the damaged area at the bottom, where the crease had ruined most of the detail. She leaned closer to the screen. There was a shape there that she had first thought was just shadow or damage, but as she adjusted the contrast a little, the shape seemed to have real form. Morgan's heart beat faster. In all her years of restoration, she had learned to trust these moments when something felt unusual. She saved her work and stood up to stretch. Tomorrow she would start rebuilding that damaged section pixel by pixel. She had no idea she was about to discover a secret hidden for 125 years. Morgan reached her studio early the next morning, with coffee and strong determination. The 1899 portrait waited on her screen, just as she had left it. The mysterious shape in the damaged section still bothered her. She had even dreamed about it. She sat down and began the slow work of digital restoration. Using good software and her experienced eye, she started rebuilding the damaged area pixel by pixel. The software suggested likely patterns from nearby areas, but Morgan always made the final choices. After 2 hours of focused work, she leaned back and blinked. The shape was clearly not damage. It was a rounded form at the top that narrowed down. She increased the magnification and kept working, removing the marks of water damage and age. By noon, she could no longer deny what she saw. It was a head, a small head low in the frame, as if the person was sitting on the floor or a low stool. It was a child. Morgan's heart raced. She checked the client's email again. It mentioned 4 people. Family records also spoke of 4. But here, coming out of more than a century of damage, was clearly a 5th figure. She worked through lunch. As she rebuilt more of the image, details appeared. Small shoulders, a simple dress, tiny hands folded in a lap. The child seemed about 4 or 5 years old, sitting slightly in front and to the left of the woman. The position was unusual. In normal Victorian family portraits, children were placed in clear view as symbols of family and future. But this child seemed tucked away, present but not the main focus. By late afternoon, Morgan had restored enough to see the child's face starting to appear. She adjusted contrast and brightness carefully to bring out details. The eyes were looking down, the expression serious, as was common when people had to sit still for long exposures. Then, she enhanced the lighting in that area. The screen changed as the software worked. Morgan stopped suddenly. The child's skin tone, now clear in the restored image, was much lighter than the 4 adults around her. She sat back, her mind racing with the meaning. A black family in 1899 Philadelphia, with a white child sitting among them as if she belonged. This was no longer just a restoration job. It was a mystery. Morgan spent the rest of the day finishing the basic restoration, but her thoughts were on the questions raised by the 5th figure. By evening, she had a clear image of all 5 people. The family stood with quiet dignity. The parents in their best clothes looked serious and proud. The 2 younger adults showed formal calm, and at the front sat the small white child with blonde hair pulled back and pale hands folded neatly. Morgan saved several versions of the file. Then she did something she rarely did before finishing a full restoration. She called the client. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Morgan Chen from the restoration studio. I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all, dear," came the warm voice. "Have you had a chance to look at the photograph?" "I have, and I've made good progress. But I need to ask you something. The family in this portrait, what do you know about them?" There was a pause. "Well, those are my great-great-grandparents, Thomas and Ruth, and their children, Samuel and Grace." "Why do you ask?" Morgan chose her words carefully. "Mrs. Patterson, in the restoration process, I've found that there's actually a 5th person in the photograph. A young child, maybe 4 or 5 years old. She was hidden by damage, but I've recovered her. Did you know there was another child in the family?" The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Morgan wondered if the call had dropped. "A 5th person?" Mrs. Patterson's voice grew quieter. "No, I've never heard anyone mention another child." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely certain." She's sitting at the front of the group. "Mrs. Patterson, there's something else. The child appears to be white." Another long pause. "White? But that doesn't make any sense. Thomas and Ruth were black. Their whole family was black. We have records, family Bible entries, everything. There's never been any mention of—" She stopped. "I understand this is unexpected," Morgan said gently, "but the image is clear. I'm going to send you what I've restored so far. Maybe you could look through your family documents and see if anything explains this." "Yes, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice thoughtful. "I'll look. My grandmother left boxes of letters and papers. I never went through most of them. Morgan, if what you're saying is true, this could be important. This could change what we know about our family. After they hung up, Morgan sat in the soft light of her studio, staring at the photograph. 5 faces looked back at her, across more than a century. 4 had been remembered and passed down in stories. But 1 had been erased, hidden not just by damage, but by silence and time. She zoomed in on the child's face. Who were you? She thought. And why did they hide you? 3 days later, Morgan's phone rang at 9 in the morning. It was Mrs. Patterson, and her voice carried excitement mixed with confusion. I found something, she said right away. In my grandmother's papers. Letters from Ruth to her sister in New York, dated from 1897 to 1902. Morgan grabbed her notebook. What do they say? Most are ordinary family news, church events, recipes. But there's one from September 1899, just a few months after that photograph. Ruth writes, "The child is well and growing. We have made our peace with the looks we receive at market. Thomas says we do what is right before God, and that is enough. Sarah has learned to say our names now, and her laughter fills the house. Morgan, she's talking about a child named Sarah, but there's no Sarah in our family tree." Morgan felt the thrill of discovery. Is there anything else? Any other mention of her? Yes, scattered through several letters over the next 2 years, always short and careful. In one from 1900, Ruth writes, "We have had visits from the church ladies asking questions we do not answer. They do not understand, and we have decided it is not their place to understand." And then in early 1901, Sarah grows tall and asks questions about her mother. We tell her what we know, which is little enough. She is ours now in all the ways that matter. Morgan wrote notes quickly. Does she ever explain how Sarah came to be with them? Not directly, but there's a letter from December 1896, 3 years before the photograph. Ruth writes, "A terrible thing happened at the docks today. A woman fell, and by the time Thomas reached her, she was gone. She had a child with her, barely 2 years old, crying in the cold. No one came forward to claim her. Thomas brought them both to the church. The woman had no papers, no name we could find. The child had nothing but the clothes on her back. Morgan, I think that's how it started." Morgan set down her pen, imagining the busy Philadelphia dock in 1896. A woman falling. A child left alone, where no one wanted the responsibility of a white orphan. And Thomas, Mrs. West Patterson's great-great-grandfather, stepping forward when others did not. What would have happened in 1896 if a black man brought a white child home? The older woman asked. Nothing good. This was after Reconstruction, during the worst of Jim Crow times. Even in Philadelphia, there were rules. A black family raising a white child. People would have assumed the worst. They could have been arrested or lost everything, but they did it anyway. Mrs. Patterson repeated softly. They did it anyway, and they never told anyone. Morgan, there's one more thing. The letters stopped mentioning Sarah after 1902. I've been through everything. There's nothing after that. It's like she just disappeared from the record. Morgan looked at the photograph. The small figure sat with the family. Her presence was captured, but her story was erased. We need to find out what happened to her. If she's in this photograph sitting with them like family, then she mattered. We owe it to Thomas and Ruth to finish their story. How do we do that? Morgan smiled. We start digging. Church records, census data, newspaper archives. She left traces. Everyone does. We just have to find them. Morgan spent the next week deep in the past. She started with the 1900 census for Thomas and Ruth's household in Philadelphia's 7th Ward. When she found the entry, her breath caught. Thomas Parker, age 42, laborer. Ruth Parker, age 38, laundress. Samuel Parker, age 21, porter. Grace Parker, age 19, domestic worker. And then, written in a different hand, squeezed into the margin as if added later, Sarah, age 5, white. Someone had recorded her. The trail led next to church records. Morgan contacted the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas. The archivist, a helpful man named Marcus, pulled old ledgers. Here, he said, pointing to an entry from 1897. Ruth Parker, new member. And look, there's a note. Has taken in an orphaned child, Sarah, age approximately 3. Child receives Christian instruction. They brought her to church, Morgan said, amazed. They didn't hide her. Marcus nodded. The black church was a place of refuge. If the Parkers said this child needed a home, the congregation would support them. But look at this. He turned the page to 1899. Sarah Parker, baptized, age 5. Parents listed as Thomas and Ruth Parker. Morgan stared. They had claimed her as their own in the eyes of the church. That night, Morgan met Mrs. Patterson at a small cafe. The older woman had brought a box of family documents, photographs, clippings, and a family Bible. I found something else, Mrs. Patterson said, opening the Bible to the family records. Look at the births. Morgan read the handwritten entries. Samuel, born 1879, Grace, born 1881, and then in different ink, Sarah, born approximately 1894, came to us 1896. Blessed be God who gives us this precious gift. Ruth wrote that, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. Morgan turned the pages. Marriages, deaths, births of grandchildren, all in Ruth's careful writing. The last entry in Ruth's hand was from 1903. Thomas gone to his rest, age 45. Beloved husband and father. Thomas died young, Morgan noted. According to family stories, it was an accident at the docks. Mrs. Patterson's eyes looked far away. Ruth lived another 30 years but never remarried. Morgan turned back to Sarah's entry. Mrs. Patterson, what happened to Sarah? The letters stop in 1902, and there's no death recorded here. I don't know, and that's what worries me. In all the family stories, there's no mention of Sarah after that photograph. It's as if she simply vanished. Morgan went next to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania and looked through old Philadelphia newspapers from 1900 to 1905. On her third day, she found a small article. It was on page 7 of the January 14th, 1902 edition, with the headline, Authorities Investigate Household Irregularity. Police were called to a residence on Lombard Street after neighbors complained about a white child living with Thomas and Ruth Parker, both colored. The child, Sarah, about age 7, had lived with the family for several years. A neighbor expressed concern for the child's welfare. The matter was sent to the Philadelphia Society for Organizing Charity. Morgan's stomach felt sick. She kept searching. Later, another mention said the society had decided to remove Sarah to a suitable home because it was best for the child to be raised among her own race. Morgan called Mrs. Patterson with shaking fingers. They took her. In 1902, the authorities took Sarah away from Thomas and Ruth. Because of their skin color, Mrs. Patterson said. Because a neighbor complained. Because someone decided a white child couldn't belong with a black family, no matter how much they loved her. Morgan's voice was full of anger. They had no choice. Did they say where they took her? To a suitable home, but no name or location. Morgan continued her search at the city archives. She found the case file. The documents showed a complaint, interviews, and a removal order. Sarah was placed temporarily at the Philadelphia Home for Infants and then adopted in March 1902 by Mrs. Charles Brennan of Germantown. Morgan traced further. The 1910 census showed Sarah Brennan, age 16, with the Brennans. In 1918, a marriage certificate, Sarah Brennan, to William Foster. Later censuses showed them with children. Sarah was still alive in 1940. Together with Mrs. Patterson, they found Sarah's granddaughter, Margaret Coleman, age 87. Morgan called her. After a meeting in person, Margaret looked at the restored photograph with tears. She remembered her grandmother speaking with sadness about another mother named Ruth, who sang to her and braided her hair. The two families learned they were connected through Sarah. 3 months later, they held a special gathering at the African Episcopal Church of St. Thomas. The restored photograph was shown on a large screen. The pastor spoke about love that went beyond barriers. Mrs. Patterson and Margaret shared stories. The families embraced. and children played together. The restored photograph now hangs in 2 homes and in the church, with a caption that honors Thomas and Ruth Parker with their children Samuel, Grace, and Sarah, a family united by love, separated by injustice, reunited by memory. May their story never be forgotten. Sarah had finally come home,